Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeffery Boney. I serve as council member out in the great city of Missouri City, Texas, as well as journalist and associate editor for the historic Forward Times newspaper here in Houston, Texas. I'm very excited to be here tonight to serve as your inaugural host for Trending Tuesdays podcast, and I want to thank none other than Danette Davis, who is the brainchild behind this effort, and we got some great conversation that we're going to have tonight, as well as some great guests. Want to start off offering my prayers, continued prayers for all those impacted by Hurricane Beryl and those that are in the recovery process trying to deal with the aftermath of having no power. Some people still without power, and we're going to get into some of that tonight as we talk about CenterPoint Energy. Hopefully they don't turn off our power as we're talking about them on tonight. But nonetheless, we're going to get into it and talk about a wide range and a wide array of subjects with our guests. And it's going to be exciting. It's going to be great. And I want to encourage all of you to not only stay tuned in, but also share the link with everyone that you know, your family, friends, your loved ones, those you care about, those you don't. Everybody needs to tune in tonight and listen to our conversation and figure out how you fit in to the discussions that are impacting our everyday lives here in not only the greater Houston area, but across the United States as we deal with a lot of the things that we're dealing with on today. I want to encourage everybody, if you're in Missouri City, speaking of which, he talked about CenterPoint. Give us the name of the article that you wrote, sir.
Yeah, so good evening, Jeff.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Let me give a formal introduction to this brother. This is Mr. Laolu Davies, and he is the HCC, current Houston Community College trustee, and he's also founder, president, CEO of Five Woods LLC, which is a real estate development, and he's just a real estate guru altogether. And we really appreciate him for being here tonight. So I know that you wrote an article recently here in the Chronicle op-ed talking about kind of breaking down the history of CenterPoint, how it moved from HLMP to its current position, and what we need to know as Houstonians. So talk about that.
Certainly, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me here, to the K. Davis team. I think it's important that we are the right combination to kick off Trending Tuesdays here. So the article that I wrote was essentially titled, CenterPoint is not your grandma's, CenterPoint today is not your grandma's HLMP, essentially. And the reference there was to really acknowledging the history of CenterPoint Energy. Texas, unlike most other places, has a very unique energy distribution market in the context of electricity. Right, we talk about Houston being the energy capital of the world and Texas and its role. So from the foundation of time, if you will, post-industrial revolution era, when electricity became a common thing that was being utilized, places like Houston had municipal-driven utility companies. You could call those public utility companies, right? And that's what dominated.
And actually get somebody on the phone.
Correct. And so Houston had that for, decades. Then around the late 90s into the 2000s, Texas went through what's known as deregulation. And so deregulation completely altered the structure of the energy market. So prior to that, HLMP was responsible for generating your power, distributing it, and sending you your bill. And then you make payment. After deregulation, we disaggregated that market. What we said in Texas was you have a subset of companies that would do generation, a subset of companies that would do distribution, and then you had an infinite number of companies who could be your retail electric provider. So what that translated to at the time was HLMP went from being the end-all be-all. Its successor company was known as Reliant Energy. If you recall, Reliant was all three. Then Reliant ultimately split into three enterprises. Reliant became the retail electric provider. CenterPoint became the distributor. NRG became the power generation company. So you have in Texas, I don't know what the exact number is, but The main generation companies, it's about 5 of them in Texas. There are others like nuclear generators, etc. But when it comes to distribution, there are 5 of them in the state of Texas. And what they did with the distribution, and when you think about distribution, it's not just the local power lines that come to your house, but those long, big transmission towers that run for hundreds of miles. Those are the assets that those distribution companies own. So the Texas market say we're going to have 5 of those. In Houston, you assign to Houston and much of Southeast Texas, CenterPoint Energy. Then you have Entergy, which kind of goes into deep East Texas. Then you have Encore, which handles the North Texas market, Dallas, etc. Then there are 2 more, I don't recall what their names are. But for all Texans today, other than El Paso, which has a unique setup relative to the rest of the state, we're all subjected to receiving our electricity, the actual electricity that comes from where it's generated to our local light pole has to go through these distributor companies. For all intents and purposes, the other term for that is called a monopoly. So we created a regulated monopoly, and it wasn't without...
Although they called it deregulation.
Correct. Right? So we created a monopoly for the distribution companies, but there were some guardrails that were put in place. And part of those guardrails say, your business model, if you're going to be a distribution entity in Texas, you get to charge a rate based on your actual cost to deliver that electricity. That's to own all of your equipment, all of your assets, plus a premium. That premium represents your profit. And based on that, that's essentially how you're supposed to operate. And so for your standard distribution company, if you're operating right and efficiently, then you can assess a rate. How's that rate determined? That's a natural question for people to want to know. It's a combination of things. For a city like Houston, the municipality has to agree or concur with whatever rate that distributor determines. And it's supposed to be based on their numbers. Hey, it costs us, let's just use for practical example, it costs us $100 million to get power to everyone. So we need to be able to charge not just $100 million, and I'm not using, it's not an exact number, I don't know the precise formula, but let's just say 100 million is what my rate case is based on. So that 100 million plus, let's say, is 17% premium means I should be able to recoup $117 million. And based on that, I apportion that share to all the people that we provide power to. That's the basic business model. And that's how CenterPoint started then. Without getting into the weeds of how they operate, because I never worked for CenterPoint, I'm just someone who's been pretty interested in the energy market. When CenterPoint started as in 2002, became a publicly traded company, much of the leadership at CenterPoint descended directly from Houston Light and Power. For example, the CEO of the newly created entity was David McClanahan. David started with CenterPoint in 1972, so he was by definition a company guy. So 30 years later in 2002, he becomes the CEO. Ingrained in that predecessor HLNP was this sense of you were a public utility, so your focus was customer service. Much of that translated, arguably, and I mean, I've talked to several people, I'm in the immediate past, not immediate past, but I've been in touch on a friendly basis. I've known a number of key leaders in CenterPoint, including the past CEO. And so you got a sense of how the company sort of operated. Like, they were still focused on the customers. Those of us in Houston, we knew them as it's like CenterPoint Energy, Houston's team, let's go, the same way we kind of felt about Reliant. However, over a couple of decades, the company held true to who it was, but as it started to grow, it started to deal with, I guess the proverbial growing pains. You're a publicly traded corporation, your shareholders are interested, and
they started putting profits over people and not having the customer service or the same customer service mentality.
Yes, you could say the end result of that transition from 02 till 2024 is a company that morphed and that you can argue now prioritizes, and I'm not saying it, as you saw in the article, in the opinion piece that I wrote, I cited news releases by CenterPoint themselves, where the new leadership was saying, we intend to create shareholder value, we want to preserve, we want to grow shareholder value, we want to prioritize. These were their words.
So let's fast forward to on Monday, early Monday morning. Hurricane Beryl hit Houston area around 2 o'clock a.m. roughly, and many people did not anticipate this quote-unquote Category 1 storm having the impact that it had, and so many individuals lost power. Now, when you talk about that transition from HLNP to CenterPoint No. 2 to present day shareholder value focused, you see that they held off on having those 12,000, or should I say extra 10,000 individuals come in and kind of be stationed and staged in the Houston area because they wanted to see where the storm was going to go. But when you talk about shareholder value, you talk about profitability, they would have had to pay those people to have been there sitting, and God forbid, okay, what if something happens and it doesn't land and hit Houston and it just deviates and goes somewhere else? Now I got to shift these people elsewhere. So they were, they seemingly were focusing on money and not on the after effects of what could happen, which ended up impacting us. So what are your thoughts on their response to the storm? And you hear Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick saying that basically there's hell to pay, that they're coming for blood when it comes to CenterPoint. So what are your thoughts on their response and kind of what you're talking about as to how they moved from HLNP to present day?
Absolutely. I think it's first important to make a distinction between CenterPoint, the corporate entity, and the rank and file workers, the frontline employees who are the line workers who work their tails off. I mean, as a real estate developer, I deal with CenterPoint employees all the time. And I mean, they're just salt of the earth people who are committed. They're trying to constantly help us solve problems. So that experience at CenterPoint is different from what most of us have experienced. Sunday afternoon around 1:30 p.m., I went and filled up my gas tank. I drive a pretty big American SUV, all-American. And the reason I bring that up is because my wife was one of those people who was not understanding that, hey, this storm is coming. And it was apparent to me by Friday evening, because we actually had a new project that we just broke. We were starting site demolition. So we were hurriedly trying to get some things done before the rain started. When I went to go fill my tank, it happened to be less than a quarter mile from one of the CenterPoint facilities. And so I filled up my tank, but I didn't see anyone there. At the time, it did not register. Tuesday evening, I drove by the same place. I saw the line of trucks. And so that's when it hit me that no one was there, right? So less than 48 hours prior to, they weren't prepared. So I can at least say from my anecdotal observation, because people can have different theories, I saw it. So it's not secondhand. I was by the facility. I saw no one there. Yes, we weren't sure where it was going to hit, but they've done this before. Like, these folks know what they're doing. And if you talk to some of the line worker and those crews, they will tell you, yeah, we're used to mobilizing. If it misses, they'll just move over 100 miles. That's not a big deal per se. Like, they show up with their trucks filled with gas and ready to mobilize to wherever they need to go. So that was the initial error, not being prepared for landfall. But after landfall occurred, there's a lot that happens after that, and depending on who you talk to, because you've heard about people saying, oh, you had these guys in their trucks sitting there and doing nothing. Well, there's a lot of complexity that goes into how power is distributed. I'll just give you by way of anecdote. People will think, okay, well, I don't have power. So let's say we lost power here, which we might have had a few glitches before we started this podcast. Naturally, you might say, well, wouldn't they come fix it at this pole? Or why do we have power here and they don't have it across the street? What most people don't realize, when CenterPoint is making a decision about what transformer serves your home, a lot of it is by field observation. You come out and you look at the poles and you figure out, okay, that one has too much running off of it, and this facility is going to need more. Hey, we've got to tap from somewhere further. So that's part of where you see a lot of those gaps where, well, my neighbor has power and I don't. So I think it's important to point that out. So once they started restoration efforts, you have to now, and I'm not speaking for CenterPoint, but just the bit that I do know, they weren't ready for it, but in the aftermath, you could have done better. One of the issues was not having a website where people could go get reliable information. I think that's still a problem that persists today. In addition,
reliable and real time.
In real time, right.
Real time.
So they didn't have that. And that's a bit confusing because, they do this, and you would think, and I think their explanation was it had gone down during the derecho and they never got it back up, which, again, we knew we were going into a major storm season. Every weather prognosticator had suggested, hey, this is likely to be a highly active hurricane season. Think about how early this storm came in. First weekend, full weekend in July, and you have this level of devastation. Remember that it had torn through the Caribbean before it came here. So in the aftermath of it, the larger issue has been communications. The first anyone saw of the CEO of CenterPoint Energy was when? Do you recall?
I think it was Wednesday.
Thursday.
Thursday.
And what was that image that you saw?
Him sitting on the couch, and in the back, I think it was like his AC was like on 70 degrees or something like that. So he was sitting comfortably.
Correct. And Jeff, we're both in public service. And even that aside, just as business people, when you have something of such magnitude occur, it's important people hear from leadership, right? And that's really the textbook definition of leadership.
Right.
If there's an issue, an error, you own it, and you talk through how you plan to fix it. I don't know the current CEO of CenterPoint. I've never met him, but it was just striking to me that we didn't hear from the board leadership. We did not hear from the CEO. The people who were put out there were, again, those who do the job. And one of the spokesperson who was there at the emergency center, I call him routinely when we're dealing with stuff, power needs related to affordable housing. So I know him quite well. Outstanding guy. He's on the money. But they were left out there. And their leaders did not step up to assure the rest of us. And I thought it took too long for leadership to really rise to the occasion. And when they would rise to the occasion, I don't know if, it literally was sitting.
Yeah, and then they would also, insert foot in mouth with some comments, kind of insensitive if you ask me, and also misleading information where they would say, oh, we have everybody restored by Friday, and here it is on today, Tuesday, and there's still people that are still awaiting power, and they're telling them now that it'll probably be this upcoming Friday that a lot of those individuals, but we still have, I want to say, about 300 some odd thousand people still without power as of today, and this storm happened over a week and a day ago.
Yeah, and I think, quite frankly, anybody who comes out now and says we're going to have everyone restored within the next week, I'm not sure that that's accurate. And I'll tell you why. If you understand, again, how power goes from the transmission lines to someone's house, there are just so many steps in between. So I'll give you an example. I was up in Lake Livingston this weekend, okay? And when you drive down Highway 2025, it's a long stretch. It's by the Sam Houston National Forest. Out of that, 15-mile stretch, every half a mile or so, you'd see where a tree had fallen and severed the entire line. Okay? So I was just doing the math, if they actually had to restore that entire 15-mile stretch, it would take so long, and how many people were going to get power off of that? Mm-hmm. So you have to understand, most of us are in the core cities, so we think of ourselves as, oh, okay, but there are a lot of people who are not in areas that are, surrounded by high-density populations. So there are a lot of people who are in remote areas in some parts of Fort Bend County that, unless they just got lucky, if some of those lines are down, it's going to take that much longer to get to a lot of those remote areas, and that's what I'm talking about and who I'm particularly worried about, because I think it's going to be easy for many of us once our lives get back to normal to think all is fine and we can move on. But this is something that's been, and yes, they reacted quickly in terms of if you do the math, The proportion of people that got back online within the time that they did, I will give credit there. But that doesn't solve the larger issue of preparedness, response and aftermath, and more importantly, what a long-term solution is.
And I want to talk about here shortly, because we have another guest, to talk about the psychological aspect of how this storm has impacted individuals. I mean, hell, if you're without power, man, you have to throw away all your food that, you've spent money on, and, you have to deal with this heat. You may not have any other place to go. Hotels are sold out everywhere. I mean, there's just a lot. You got to deal with maybe kids or elders that may be on oxygen or dialysis, and there's so much. And as before I bring up the guests, I want to point out, you talked about preparedness, the fact that it was uncovered and stated that CenterPoint Energy had been been asked for a long time to cut trees and vegetation around many of their power lines. And so as you go out and you talked about that field observation, a lot of these areas that have had long stints of not having power restored happen because of down power lines, because of many of their areas that have these trees that, like you say, the trees severed the power lines, or one of my properties, I had to go out and see, and the tenant was like, hey, there's like, fire coming from the trees. And so, going out, doing my own site observation, I see these embers, just in the sky inside of the trees, and they kept falling from the ground. And the firefighters were called out, and they said, well, we can't touch this because that's CenterPoint Energy's responsibility. But you look at the area and all of the trees surrounding it, and it's like, no wonder that this has happened, and no wonder these individuals were without power for so long. So at any rate, this has brought forth a huge mental, psychological, emotional, and even physical, toll on so many people. People have lost lives. I want to say the count now is up to 6 individuals that have passed away as a result. But I want to bring in someone to kind of talk about this, and they're a very, very seasoned and well-known individual in the area of mental health and dealing with mental counseling, and I'm talking about none other than Dr. Janice Beal. Let's have her, come on, let's give her a round of applause as she comes and joins us on today here on Trending Tuesdays. And so hopefully, Dr. Welcome to Trending Tuesdays. Hopefully you are with power now.
Actually, I'm not, but it's okay. Yes,
wow.
It came on and it went off. So yesterday, for some reason, so they're estimating Friday being our day. So
as someone who deals with other people's emotional trauma and mental trauma, how has this impacted you?
I think I'm a little traumatized myself because it's extremely warm, even though you have a generator and it's doing everything it's supposed to do. But getting back to normal, anytime anything upsets our normal being and has an impact on us, psychologically, people are affected. Mm-hmm. And so we don't talk about it because it's kind of like, well, nobody's really thinking about what the psychological or emotional impact, but not having lights for a certain length of time. I mean, we happen to have a generator, not a generator set, so we're going to get that. That's coming, but just not having the things that you need and what it does.
They need to send Trending Tuesdays a check for advertising, talking about Generac. But anyway, go ahead.
That is true. That is true. When you mention it and it comes up on your feed with Facebook, you'll see it all the time.
So have you had to deal with, because I mean, we got kids involved, we have a lot of the elders that are impacted, and those that are caregivers for both. So have you seen any negative trends as it relates to this, or any things that you can speak to, and maybe even some things that you can encourage the listening audience as to how to deal with this, not only for if they're dealing with it currently, but also in the future?
You got to realize that when something happens, it's traumatizing to an individual. It's an individual type experience. But when a disaster occurs, whether it's man-made or whether it's natural, depends on something that you have no control over. So that's the most devastating part with anything and trying to understand that. And we just recently, we're like a month post something happening before now, and now we're into something else, and then the news is telling us to prepare because this is the beginning of the season. So when something starts to happen like that, the fear, because right after the flood that we had recently, people started, every time it would rain, they started to feel a certain type of way. And it's something because we don't talk about mental health, we don't talk about how we're doing emotionally, people just kind of like just worked through it and went through it. So now I spoke with a physician earlier today, and she couldn't discharge the elderly because they needed to have a place to go to, and their home did not have air. So emotionally, somebody's kept in the hospital longer physically than they should be because she didn't want to do and send them home because they didn't have any space or didn't have any place to go. So it impacts everybody, from going to work or not being able to go to work, from children being fearful of what's going on when the winds, start to rear up a little bit, and even down to animals experiencing. And so what we see most often when there's something that happens would be something like post-traumatic stress disorder, and it depends on what that person actually experienced, and then we see a lot of anxiety, and we also see a lot of depression.
But also, a lot of anger and frustration tends to, or at least that's what I've seen. There were reports of someone having fights at the gas station as well as in the grocery store.
And then there was a parking spot.
Someone was shot trying to get into a parking spot. Also, a gun was pulled on a Centerpoint line worker because they wanted their power on, and they saw the lineman, and they were like, you better turn my power on now, and pull the gun on them. This literally happened. And so, I mean, you talk about mental health and mental challenge, as it relates to disasters, natural disasters, or other types of, trauma situations. How do you encourage individuals to try to weather the storm? No pun intended.
Oh, okay, that's a good way to put it. Okay, first of all, when heat brings about anger anyway. So if you're angry, you may find yourself when it's hot becoming angrier faster because of the change in the temperature. So we have that taking place. And then the stress of not knowing and having no control over what's happening also impacts people. And it impacts how they deal with things and what happens for them. So you find a person who has no control over anything. And so when you don't have control is when you start to build up fear. Fear brings anxiety as well. So people start to respond in anger as a byproduct, because that's an emotion as well that we experience. So all those things are happening all at one time. So now we have a person who's not making good judgments by pulling a gun on a Centerpoint person, or a person who's trying to get into a parking space, where really you can just go to the next parking space and it'll be okay, because I'm sure there's not only more than one space available. So to be able to stop and think, which is what we talk about, stop and think, and think about the choices that you have. We teach children that. Adults kind of lose it during that time period, because they don't know, and they're trying to fend for their families, so they're trying to do all these things, and they just feel out of control and lost. In addition to the fear factor, what the hurricane was, it was very fearful. It hit like boom, 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 and you're watching it, and it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And when things start to fly, you have no control over that. So the loss of control, all the things that are taking place in addition to the emotional impact that it has on individuals, is something that we need to start talking about. So I have done a lot of work throughout the years as far as talking to children. We talk to them, what is the difference between a hurricane? What is the difference between a tornado? So they understand. Understanding and education at a young age is very important. So they know that these are things that we need to do. This is things how we have to stay safe. What does safety look like? Safety means that when this happens, we do X, Y, and Z as much as we can. So now you're giving them a plan in order to think about. This is the child and adolescent component. So we didn't have enough time. I don't think we really realized that it was going to come this time, because nobody was going and buying water until the day before. You did? Okay. Well, you had more information.
Initially, it was not projected to hit Houston.
Correct.
Or the greater Houston area. It was supposed to go hit Mexico directly, and then it just shifted, and then it shifted again, and then it's like, wow, it's coming.
But it's like life. You can't plan life out.
But we had a couple of days, though. We did have a couple of days.
Did you go get water? He said.
Oh, I did. I mean, we were in Costa Rica until Thursday, July 4th. And while there, it was supposed to go to the Yucatan Peninsula and roll up from there towards Brownville, Corpus. Mm-hmm. We land in Houston Thursday night, and it's like, the reason I was we have a new project starting, so I'm looking at the weather, so maybe I was a bit more curious than most people. So it became clear to me that, okay, it's going to start raining on Saturday, and not only that, this thing looks like it's turning towards us. And if you pay attention to Space City Weather and some of these other non-mainstream weather forecasters, they had started saying as of Thursday that this thing looks like it's going to come towards us. Always, so when they give you those projections, those are just simply statistical probabilities. We were always one of those statistical probabilities. It was just as it got closer, the probability got higher. And so for some of us, we saw that. If I could add a footnote to what Dr. Beal shared about the trauma. So I always like to remind most of us, a lot of our contemporaries and colleagues, of our privilege. And this is not in a bad way, but when we say, oh, we can get a Generac, we have to remember that for most Houstonians, that is not a feasible idea, right? So when I talked about, let's not solve the problem and then forget because there are those of us who can't figure out how we get generators, but to also harp on the point that she made about the trauma. So she lives in a house that when the winds were blowing, she was not scared the roof might cave in. But you know how many Houstonians live in substandard housing who had real legitimate fear of what that wind could do to them. And their recovery is so much more challenging. There are Houstonians whose homes have not been repaired since Harvey.
They still have blue tarps.
And they still have blue tarps. So they've endured Harvey, Winter Storm Uri, and now this. So I think it's important that we keep that context in terms of the real psychological effects that have been lingering for that length of time.
Yeah.
Well, and so trauma, which thank you for saying that, because trauma, unless it's dealt with, you just build on top of each other. So you've gone back to Harvey. Harvey was several years ago. So if things are still undone, every time something happens or every time there is rain that comes that's heavy or anticipatory of something taking place, would cause somebody to react or relive what they've experienced in the past. So, and we have a lot of trauma as African Americans, I'll just say that. And so, and a lot of times we don't want to talk about mental health, and we don't want to talk about what it takes in order to be mentally well, because I've changed the term so that people will be more accepting of the concept. So when I go out and talk, I say, let's talk about mental wellness. What does that look like? So the tools that I was kind of giving a little bit for the children and kind of like talking about it and, like, this is what we do, this is what it looks like, and putting a plan in place will give them a sense of decreasing the anxiety even when it happens, because they may not be in a place, just like he was discussing, that will be safe. But let's figure out what our safety plan is going to look like.
Yeah.
And they're going to feed off of the parents and the adults. So if the adults are anxious and the adults are stressed, and the adults are trying to figure out, how do I work through this? I don't have the funds to pay for it. I don't have this. I don't have the insurance. So all the things that can come as a result, and of course, everything else builds up. So the stressors increase. So when you have stressors, then that's when other things start to happen, and that brings on, once again, depression and anxiety. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder is a totally different. That's when you start to relive what's taken place. So you start to have nightmares and dreams about what's going to happen. And I've heard too many people kind of mention it. Oh my God, I'm getting stressed. I don't know what to do. And talking to adults about what's happened. So for them, it's becoming a reality because now they're saying it and verbalizing how they feel. And so that's the first thing that starts, is when you're talking about how your feelings are and what you feel and what's going on in your environment that's causing you to feel that type of way.
And speaking of trauma and drama, I want to segue for a minute. This is called Trending Tuesdays. And so there's a lot of drama and trauma going on in the United States right now. We're in the midst of the 2024 presidential election. And we've seen so many things and heard about so many things. Some people are familiar with, some may not, but we've probably heard discussions about. Of course, we see what just recently happened. There's a lot of people who believe it may have been staged, and some people believe that it was real. We do know that someone was murdered or killed as a result of a shooting that took place involving the former president of the United States. And so there's been a lot of trauma, a lot of drama surrounding that, and it's impacting all of us because you got a lot of stressors out there that people are dealing with because they don't know what the direction of this country is going to look like. There's Project 2025 that's being discussed as to what the potential Republican platform will be under a Republican president in Congress, and Also, of course, that is put on by the Heritage Foundation. And then you have, like I said, people talking about the ages of both candidates and not feeling, comfortable with whatever choice that they have to make, whether it be for the current president, Joe Biden, for his reelection, or for the reelection of a now convicted felon. So your thoughts on that as it relates to, I'll start with you, Dr. Beal, as it relates to the stress, trauma, and drama involving 2024 presidential election. And also, if you're familiar with the Project 2025, y'all can speak to that as well. I'll go to you first.
Okay, so yes, I am familiar with 2025, and I don't like it at all. And so that becomes an educational component for educating everybody about it, because a lot of people have not read it. And they don't understand what that means as far as a group of people, how we will be affected, and people of color and women will be affected by what happens and what's being said. So I think it's very important that if you haven't, I've just said, I tell young people when I'm talking all the time, hey, let me just give you, and you can look at it and read it for yourself. So therefore, they tend to get a lot of things off of those, it's TikTok, and then those Reels and Instagrams and all of those. So there are a lot of people talking about it that look like them. So hopefully that would resonate with them, that there is a concern, and we need to be really concerned as a group, a race of people, what this would look like if we don't go to the polls and vote in November, and how significant that is and how important that is. So when we talk about the historical concept of trauma, because now we're getting into something that's even really more so. As a group of people, we've been traumatized for so long on so many different things that I don't know why the audience will be, but anyone can possibly talk about the trauma from their ancestors and going down and what that actually looks like. So we're about to open the door and allow the trauma to take place, and it'll be the first time that we'll be actually doing it to ourselves versus somebody else or something else doing it for us. So when things are repeated, like the shot that took place and showing that and what have you, I often tell parents that if something consistently is on television that's traumatizing, things you don't want to do, cut the television off. Because the only thing you're doing emotionally is bringing that same information back into your homes, and it's causing you to relive what's being said, because the news media will continue to report on it, and it may take all day, it may go all day. So you have hours of listening to something that was not positive, something that's negative, and the impact that it has on everybody as well. So I said after a certain point, when whatever happens in the world, just turn the television off, whether it's somebody who was shot, a fight, or anything of that nature, anything that's going to bring a certain amount of negativity. And so, like with anything else, if you don't discuss it, it's not going anywhere. It just builds on top of each other. So it's almost like having a volcano. And if you allow me to do this one example that I often talk about, with the volcano, at the bottom of the volcano, that's where the lava is at the bottom. So it builds up throughout years and throughout time. And so therefore, as time progresses, we're not doing anything about it, just letting it stay there because it's dormant. But at some point, it does get to the top. And when it does get to the top, it explodes. So that's what happens when people don't deal with past traumas and past experiences. Okay? You can think that you're forgetting about them, but just something could happen that's not related that can cause it to come to the forefront.
Wow. Laolu.
So I want to start with the traumatic side of the violence that took place Saturday night in Pennsylvania, with the former president being shot at and attempted assassination. A lot of the aftermath of it, we heard messages of reconciliation and so on and so forth.
Unity.
But I can tell you that part of the trauma that Dr. Beal is talking about, many of you might not remember, but I'll give you 3 anecdotes about the folks who are now calling for unity and how we ought to denounce violence, because I've always been for denunciation of violence. But I had to remind folks that in 2012, Eric Geitens was a candidate for Congress out of Missouri, poses with AR-15, launching round after round about how they're going to, then there was another candidate who stacked up the whole entirety of the Affordable Care Act at a gun range and fired his, AR through it and fired rounds through it. Then Marjorie Taylor Greene with her sniper shot, and even your former land commissioner, George P. Bush, in his announcement video for Attorney General, He decides to go down to a gun range and launch a few rounds down with an AR-15. We've embraced a culture of violence. We've fomented this. And so when you now evolve into that violence hitting home in a different way, you can't ignore the trauma that she's talked about. And think about, and here's the other thing. Everyone has had this response. Oh, we have to do better. This can't be accepted. Do you know how many mass shootings there have been this month? In the 8 or so days before that shooting, do you know how many mass shootings occurred? There have been at least 3 mass shootings in the United States that I can recall. And those are the ones that I know. I'm not talking about the ones that I did not read about. But we pay no attention to those.
We become numb to it.
We've become numb to it until it happens in this way. And my fear is, knock on wood, that this does not become something else we become numb to. So if you don't go back and deal with the reality of the trauma that gun violence has wrought on us as a people, as a society, then I think it's just fundamentally a disservice to us all. So from there, I'm going to go to the conversation about Project 2025. The Project 2025, for those who might not know, it's the manifesto that was spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation as their plan for 2025 and beyond in anticipation of the 45th president ascending once again as the 47th president of the United States. In their plan, and I'm just going to talk about a few snippets, one that I think is fundamentally important is how they want to eliminate 50,000 people from the federal agencies. This is their idea of cutting off the quote-unquote deep state.
Yeah, draining the swamp.
Draining the swamp and replacing them with people who think how they think. Because they want to fundamentally restructure America as you know it. This is not innuendo. We're not embellishing. It is a real plan. The candidate, the presumptive nominee, I guess he became officially the nominee yesterday, could say was, I don't subscribe to the Project 2025. But if you notice one thing, he didn't denounce any of the contents of the plan. All he could do was dissociate himself from the plan. I didn't put it together. I didn't authorize it. Well, whether we like it or not, they have a plan. Mm-hmm. And if you want to know about the Heritage Foundation, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name, but there was an article not too long ago that talked about the most powerful man, according to Clarence Thomas, you've never heard of. And he was the guy who ran government relations for the Heritage Foundation through the 90s all the way up until George W. Bush. They laid a foundation for 20 to 25 years for what you see now. The Federalist Society was a creation of that planning. Through the Federalist Society, over a period of decades, they recruited young students, in some cases before they got to college. If you were part of certain debate clubs in high school that were debating arch conservative principles, they were recruiting people that early. So when you look at the Ted Cruz's of the world, the Justice Brett Kavanaugh, they didn't just find, they groomed those people. Amy Coney Barrett was one of theirs as well. So was Neil Gorsuch. But in particular, Justices Barrett and Kavanaugh had been rocking with them since probably their college days or right afterwards, because they all clerked for some, certain justices or appeals court justices or some judges along the way. So they have a plan. Project 2025 is merely a culmination of a plan they've been working on since the Nixon era. We're just seeing the manifestation. The unfortunate reality is we don't have a counter plan, so yet again we're stuck trying to react to what someone else is doing. And Dr. Beal talked about young people, and I've had several conversations with. I was talking to one in my family last night, Monday, and they were saying, well, the economy was better under Trump, things were just better, it feels. I said, help me understand this. You just explained to me you tried to go to dinner with one of your aunts, and y'all couldn't get a reservation because all the restaurants were packed. And you're telling me the economy is doing that bad? Or all the times I'll be on a flight tomorrow, the flight will probably be all the way full with no seats to spare, or the numerous places that I've been traveling to, everywhere is packed. So, I mean, I'm not trying to belittle those who are really challenged economically. What I was trying to help them understand is you're fundamentally misguided because of what you're being told. And they talk about inflation. Well, inflation was driven by, and I had to explain the whole supply and demand equation, the basic principle of economics. So we have to have real conversations with these young people, and I don't give them a pass. You have to challenge that ideology that's being, slowly inculcated into them through drip marketing, social media, TikTok videos, the Amber Roses of the world, Kanye, North Star West, I don't know, whichever he goes by now. Like, you have all of that happening. And it's having an effect, and we can't keep negating it. But I'll pause there.
Well, I just want to bring up a few things as it relates to Project 2025 that I've, that should be disturbing to everyone, particularly African Americans. They talked about eliminating the Department of Education, and replacing it with, redirecting funds to private religious schools, and also, of course, the school vouchers is something that has always been pushed, but also teaching Judeo-Christian, education in our school systems. And they talked about cutting Medicare and cutting Social Security, ending the Affordable Care Act. There's so many things. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I read like all 900 pages of this thing, and it's a lot. But if you really care about the future of your country, unless you got dual citizenship and ready to bounce tomorrow, you need to care about what's going on in your country, and you need to get engaged and involved to encourage individuals to vote, because that is what they're banking on. That's why they're bringing forth the Amber Roses and various others to try to reach out to African Americans to get them to support something that they have a plan for, but they don't understand the fullness of the plan and how that's going to impact them down the line, and not only them, but their children and their children's children for many years to come. And I just wanted to read a few, if I could, and I wanted you all to speak on them. They say raise the retirement age. They also say raise prescription drug prices. They also say end free and discounted school lunch programs. They also say end civil rights and DEI protections in government. Ban African American and gender studies in all levels of education. Ban books and curriculum about slavery. End climate protections. Deregulate big business in the oil industry. Promote and expedite capital punishment. End marriage equality. Defund the FBI and Homeland Security. Use the military to break up domestic protests. That's just a few. We remember the response to the George Floyd murder that saw on camera, and we saw how people protested. They're talking about utilizing the military to disrupt domestic protests, stop domestic protests. You're right. So a lot of these things are the freedoms that we enjoyed thanks to those that fought during the civil rights movement, and even before that, coming out of slavery and through Reconstruction. A lot of the gains that we've seen since Jim Crow, since the slave codes, since Brown versus Board of Education, and many others. They want to roll back the clock. And so, thoughts, Dr. Beal?
It's amazing how they decided they want to rewrite history. And so their history will not be our history because it won't be the right history. It'll be a history of somebody had made up something. So just like the fake news, we're going to have fake history because they're not going to be able to read about it. They're taking away the books already for students. So
but is it going to be fake history, or is it going to be their history?
It's going to be their history of what they want to teach us. So no matter what happened, and those of us who will probably not 40, 50 years from now, not be here to be able to say, no, in 1960 this took place. In 1968, Martin Luther King was shot. All the years of all the things that have happened will no longer be written down. And how do we pass things on? We pass things on through books. The majority of the things that you were talking about were things that affected us as a group of people. You know, DEI, diversity and inclusion. So therefore, getting into colleges and universities and getting into schools and things that they've already taken away already taken away women's rights to be able to not decide what they want to do with, or what we want to do with our bodies.
Oh,
That's
they said
already,
a nationwide abortion ban
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
oh, okay.
That's another one of the points.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, and then we have a Supreme Court that voted against certain, so we know what that's going to look like if it goes to the Supreme Court. So they're taking away a lot of things that will affect us, and not only will we be pushing back time, we won't even know what time would be like in 30 or 40 years from now if we allow this to happen. And if we think that they have a good plan, then somebody needs to sit down and we need to educate everybody about this is not a good plan.
But you know, Laolu mentioned the fact that they have a plan,
But we don't.
and that's been a sad reality. To be reactionary versus proactive and having a plan of action that everyone can agree on. What you found as it relates, and I'll just speak to parties here because this is a conservative approach and a plan that's put forth for Republicans and for the Republican nominee that he just mentioned would ascend to the presidency of the 47th president. But you know, there's so many individuals jockeying for position in the Democratic Party where it's like, who's going to be the chief and who's going to be the Indian? Nobody wants to be the Indian, so everybody wants to be the chief, and then you find yourselves behind the 8 ball. I was going to say, President Trump just announced that J.D. Vance, senator out of Ohio, is his vice presidential nominee. A gentleman who actually was very critical of President Trump originally, and he has some very controversial views himself. Of course, he is supportive of a nationwide ban, abortion ban. He's also he's a election denier. He believes that the election was quote unquote stolen, and he also, which I thought is one of the most interesting things, he believes that women should stay in marriages that are abusive and that you know they should do it for the sake of the children, to keep traditional families together, regardless of the situation. So I'm just saying these are things that have been espoused by that individual and many others. And so I'm just saying this is the reality of what we are all faced with as it relates to the decisions, and the election is in November.
And domestic violence, I mean, that's crazy to even think about that. The impact that domestic violence has on the family in totality does not mean that the children would be benefiting from being in a home where there's abuse. That doesn't make sense to me. That, you know, and our numbers went up a lot during COVID when people were home and things of that nature as far as domestic violence reports, both male and female, and what that impact is. What it's telling you is that they didn't talk to anybody who's experienced any of those things, that they just sat down with a piece of paper and said, I think the world would be better if we did X, Y, and Z. So it's almost like, what type of person would you think that would write those type of things and would want people to actually experience that? We were talking about gun violence a few minutes ago, but talk about when somebody's abusing someone, whether it's mental, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and we're going to stay at home and we're going to because of the sake of the children, you're going to have messed up kids, okay? Because that's not where they want to be, and that's not going to be a healthy environment. Nothing about the whole family, nothing about, so it's amazing to me the type of individual that we would look at, who the authors of that document were. Who were they? You know, where are they? What kind of world are they living in? What type of value systems? Obviously they don't have any, because they want to take away everybody else's.
But the reality is, at this stage of the game, 50-50 chance right now. You know, either President Trump or either former President Trump is going to be the president of the United States again, or President Biden or whoever the nominee is on the Democratic side is going to be the president. Those are the two options at this point, and they're going to direct the future of this country.
And sadly, that's where Democrats are missing the mark. You have the Republican side who has reconciled within themselves that not only are they putting forward a convicted felon, multiple convictions, someone who was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Don't forget the civil judgment that was secured by Letitia James against their business, the Trump organization in New York. Now they're doubling down with someone who thinks condoning violence, domestic violence is okay. And and he's on tape saying it. It's not like something that we're just insinuating from what he said. So if the Republican Party can overlook all of that, you want to sit here and talk to me about a debate on June 26th that's so long ago, and how many press conferences since? I remember the press conference last week where he took questions for an hour. I watched the last 40 minutes of it, and I thought, man, he did quite an outstanding job. Only at the end did the NBC commentator say, well, he stumbled, and he had some stumbles. He's a stutterer. I have an uncle who stutters, so I know what the experience is like. But him juxtaposing the vice president with Trump, obviously he didn't even come back to correct himself because he just did not even realize he made that Freudian slip. But that's what you want to consume yourselves with against all the other things that we're talking about, the evidence of all the harsh things that are.
And I wish we had another hour or so to have a conversation. I know we're up against the clock, but I just want to say that, last night during the opening of the RNC, Donald Trump was on video, on camera, falling asleep. But yet you don't hear the media talking about his age and, this man going to sleep, seemingly not even caring about anything. And I just want to ask this one last question as it relates to one of the topics. President Trump says that, former President Trump, I don't want to speak that into existence, sorry. Former President Trump indicated that if elected, he would make sure he brings back black jobs that have been stolen and taken away from African Americans. So, he gonna get everybody a black job. So, if y'all really want a black job, y'all need to make sure in November you vote for the former president. But what is a black job, y'all?
Well, the job I'm doing right now is a black job. Okay.
Well, what black jobs was he referring to that he was gonna get you?
4 degrees? The black job prepared me for it. So I don't understand what's a black job, because we are everything. We can do anything, and we are doing everything. So there are no such things. I think he was talking about the domestic jobs maybe, which there are okay, because there are people who, everybody has a place and everybody has a skill base of what they can do. So there is no such thing as a black job as far as, I've cracked a lot of jokes, but I don't want to put that on video. And I definitely don't want to put it where everybody can call back. But I'm angry at that. I became angry at the fact that he said it. And we've accepted it, and the world acted as if it was okay. It was just us that said, what do you mean about a black job? What is a black job? There's no such thing as being a minister, is that a black job? Being someone who works for Centerpoint and being able to do, is that a black job? I mean, what is a black job? I'm sorry, you
I'm
may
going
have
to
something.
cut more to the chase about it.
I don't have one.
Like, the backdrop was immigrants are flooding the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they're taking black jobs. It's unmistakably clear. What jobs do immigrants take on? It's the menial task that, presumably in this context, majority Americans don't want to take on. So now you juxtapose that with, well, this really should be a black job. I'm proud of the kind of work that I do. As someone who works in the construction industry, there are a bunch of black people who work in construction, contrary to popular belief, but they don't view it as black jobs. From HVAC to electrician, plumbers, they're doing very well with their businesses. It's an insult. It's unacceptable. I don't even think it dignifies trying to rationalize. I appreciate what your frat brothers, you guys were in Tampa for your annual convention.
You can say the name of the fraternity. Go ahead, say it.
That will remain unsaid. But I thought, considering
Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Go ahead and say it.
It's about 10% of them who read at college grade level, but they capture most of them.
Wait a second.
We ain't gonna go there now.
No.
All right, we enjoyed y'all coming. No, go ahead, finish.
The brothers of Omega Psi Phi did an excellent job of,
highlighting the kinds of things that black, in this case, black men do, the roles they occupy in society. But to me, it's the lowest form of desecration of the contributions black people have made to this society to reduce black folks down to so-called black jobs that immigrants have taken. It's an insult.
And as we close, I also found it very disheartening to hear many Republicans, one in particular, indicate that the head of the Secret Service, who's an African American woman, only got that job because of DEI. Oh. Not because of her qualifications or education or experience, but because of DEI. That she's a DEI hire. And see, DEI has become the buzzword instead of using the N-word or CRT, critical race theory. So they use these buzzwords instead. They can't say, it's kind of like the gentleman that was over Nixon's. It was Atwater.
Lee Atwater.
Lee Atwater.
Yeah.
Lee Atwater, the political strategist for Richard Nixon, and the architect of the Southern Strategy. Said you can't say the N-word anymore. You got to use busing and other types of
urban communities and various other terms. He literally said this in an interview that you can't use these words. You can't say the N-word. Yeah. And he used the N-word. He said you can't say the N-word. You got to use states' rights and urban communities and busing. And basically you're saying the N-word without saying it. So now they've flipped the script, if you will. Now they're using critical race theory, DEI, and they're attacking these things because that's black. That's the new N-word. And so I think it's important for us to understand the dynamics of where we are as a country and, highlight our black jobs, but also not just highlight our black jobs, but highlight our voices and our vote. And we need to get people to the polls.
So
I'll let you guys have a final.
I think that is our black job to go vote. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we want to play on words, because if we don't vote, then we don't have a voice anymore. And I don't want people complaining after we didn't go out to the polls and vote and think your vote doesn't count. So if we do what our ancestors did when they had our people before us, we had to fight for things. We need to keep that fight up. We need to understand what that means. You got me totally out of the realm of my expertise, and we're on to something as far as what I totally believe in. We need to make sure that we understand, and not only did your fraternity, I think my sorority also did a lot as far as voting and voting rights, and having the vice president to come and talk about what we need to do, and we need to be charged up. We need to be ready, and we need to stop sitting by letting somebody else do it and speak for us. We need to be able to speak for ourselves. I cannot complain if I didn't do anything to change. It becomes insanity to keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Yeah. So if you stay home, don't say anything, because you didn't do anything to help with the solution. So the solution comes with us doing something and getting activated and going out and understanding. I don't want my history erased. African Americans, we've done everything. What have we not invented? Yeah. When you look at the list of things and inventions that have taken place.
Yeah, if you don't vote, you may get one of them black jobs, but you might not get paid for it. You may do it for free. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, Jeff, I'd be remiss if I didn't, for the record, the sister who's now head of the Secret Service, I didn't know she was a sister, believe it or not. So that commentary about DEI, the first thing I heard about her was that they hired someone who worked for Pepsi after she had been deputy director for the Secret Service. She left the public sector, went in the private sector, and because the Bidens had known her since her days as deputy director, she was brought back in to lead the Secret Service. So it's important to point that out. I'd say it's pretty simple. For many people who think that it's even a question about whether your vote matters, we need to understand our history. The only way that happens is the two E's, education and enlightenment. If the schools are not going to do it, then it's on us to help enlighten ourselves. The next E I'll talk about is economic empowerment. That's the next frontier for us. We have to take care of the E's, the education the continuous enlightenment, and now economic empowerment. I would add, Martin Luther King was killed when he had gotten into pushing the fight from civil rights to economic empowerment. So it demonstrates to you how important that aspect is. And we have to tie those things together, whether it's black jobs, whether it's paid jobs. Education leads to economic opportunity, but more importantly, we need to start doubling back down to what made our communities thrive in the past, where it was that economic interdependence. And if people don't think that it's going to be bad, I hate to say, but we might all just have to live through the reality of those dark days, because that might be what gets us back down to the fundamentals. Let's hope it doesn't come to that.
I want to thank our guests tonight, Dr. Janice Beal and Laolu Davies. Let's give them a round of applause, everybody in the audience. And as we close, I just want to encourage everybody, to look at where we are as a country and see some of the things that are being done in plain sight. And I want to encourage us to do a little historical fact-checking of ourselves and look back in the history of our country, the early part of the 1900s, 1920s and 30s to be exact, and think of a gentleman who terrorized this world, particularly in Europe. I'm talking about a gentleman by the name of Adolf Hitler. He wrote a manifesto, speaking of manifesto, put forth by the Heritage Foundation, this Project 2025. He wrote a manifesto called Mein Kampf, where he talked about the future of what he felt Germany should look like, and who should be in control and who should be murdered, killed, and subjected to slavery and various other things. And it was those that were blonde hair, blue eyes, and those that were traditionally true Germans. But there was something in particular, if you look at the history of that, he wrote that in prison, and when he got out, he got involved in politics. Mm-hmm. He got involved in politics because he realized that the true way to influence the country and to bring forth the reality of what he envisioned was to get involved with politics and to influence public policy. And when he became a politician, he came forth in 1933 with an act called the Enabling Act, which allowed him and gave him the power to do everything through the form of dictatorship. Mm-hmm. And because he had the individuals, the decision makers that could pass the policy to give him the power to be able to do what we now know him to have done through the Holocaust and various other atrocities. So I'm just letting us know that if you give someone unlimited power, as the Supreme Court just did with some of its rulings and decisions, and you give person carte blanche to make decisions and to influence public policy, there's no telling what our country would look like and where we would be as African Americans, others in this country, if we don't wake up and do what we need to do to get to the polls. All right? With that being said, I want to thank again Kay Davis and her production team, Linda Ragland. I want to encourage everybody. I'm happy to have been a sponsor of this, the Boney Insurance Group, theboneyinsuranceGroup.com. I want to encourage you to go visit it for all your business and commercial insurance needs. With that being said, God bless. Come on up, Kay Davis.
I just wanted to say that I wanted to thank Dr. Janice Beal. I want you guys to stand. It's okay if we're going to lose a range if you do. Someone that, and if I ask to do anything, it's always for you. And this is the Honorable Jeff Boney or what have you, and Laolu, as always, just fantastic. Don't you guys agree? This was our inaugural ride. We're just getting started. We're going to have some exciting guests. We make it past this one. Thank you. Thank you, what have you. And we won't be back next Tuesday, but the 30th is our next Trending Tuesdays. It's going to be fun. We want people to come out. We have a nice audience. You can't see them, but they're over there. Thank you for those supporters. And we'll be here with a fun and some food the next time as well. So you want to get on the call in or register or what have you, so we can make sure you can get your seat. Have your face at the place. Thank you.
All right.
Good night.